Welcome to the Gottesdienst crowd, where we foster confessional integrity, liturgical preservation, and preaching that doesn't stink. We believe that the historic liturgy of the divine service is more than mere cobwebs of antiquity, but it is a true treasure of the Church to be dusted off and brought down from her attic to be enjoyed. So let's get dusting.
Welcome back to the Gottesdienst crowd. This is Jason Braaten. Today we have back with us Dave Petersen. Welcome back, Dave.
Thank you.
We are going through the Gospel reading for Jubilate Sunday. For some of us, it's the third Sunday after Easter. For those of us on LSB, it's the fourth Sunday of Easter. I think they changed that so that they could copyright that particular those Sundays in the church year, but who knows?
It's an entirely new translation of the number 3.
We're just busting CPH's chops. Okay, so the gospel reading is John 16 to 22, and we know from last year when we spoke about that, these are our favorite Sundays in the church year. I'll go ahead and read that in the English Standard Version. Jesus said, "A little while and you will see me no longer, and again a little while and you will see me." So some of his disciples said to one another, "What is this that he says to us? A little while and you will not see me, and again a little while and you will see me, and because I am going to the Father." So they were saying, "What does he mean by a little while? We do not know what he is talking about." Jesus knew that they wanted to ask him, so he said to them, "Is this what you are asking yourselves, what I meant by saying, 'A little while and you will not see me, and again a little while and you will see me'? Truly, truly, I say to you, you will weep and lament, but the world will rejoice. You will be sorrowful, but your sorrow will turn into joy. When a woman is giving birth, she has sorrow because her hour has come. But when she has delivered the baby, she no longer remembers the anguish for joy that a human being has been born into the world. So also you have sorrow now, but I will see you again, and your hearts will rejoice, and no one will take your joy from you." All right, so context.
Well, this is the middle of the scene in the upper room that began in John 13. So the night in which Jesus is arrested, betrayed and arrested. And this section culminates with chapter 17 and the high priestly prayer. So this is preparation for Good Friday.
Yeah. So farewell discourse. He's prepping them for the little while. Any translation issues?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Though, admittedly, I didn't spend a lot of time in the Greek, but I don't. It just seems very straightforward. A lot of repetition. That word mikron, a little while, shows up 7 times. Right. I don't know. If you want to make some mystical application of that, but
well, it does. It's kind of like reading those chapters in Daniel about the bowing to the golden, and they just keep repeating this over and over again, and you just feel like you're saying a little while all the time.
Well, so that's, I think, a little different. So in the Daniel thing, that is like that's like the Odyssey or this ancient literature where these things are like clues to help the person who's reciting it remember it. They're like markers, And so that kind of litany has to do with it being recited, right? Yeah. Read out loud, but not by reading it. And I think that's what that is. Whereas this, I don't think is intended to be memorized and read out loud in the same kind of way. Yeah. So,
well, I always took the Daniel thing as a mockery of it. They say it so much that you just
are part of it. Trumpets
trumpets and the sackbut, and when you hear that, it's just like never ending, and you're like, "Gosh, I got your point. You're making
also
fun of it."
Also, the levels of bureaucracy as well.
Yeah, the satraps and the.
Yeah, right. This is one complicated, bureaucratic institution. Yeah. That's fair. I think you're right. That there is a kind of mockery in it as well. Yeah. Well. So anyway, this is a little bit different, but
I mean,
there's
is there a sense in which Jesus is mocking the disciples for asking about this little while?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't.
Is that
I'm
blasphemous
willing.
to ask?
What's that?
Is that blasphemous of me to ask?
No, because he does engage in mockery.
Right.
I mean, Jesus does, but I don't think this is he's being very serious. He's laying out this essential reality that so this is right. Here's the problem in verse 16. A little while, basically a couple hours, right? You're not going to see me anymore, and then you're going to a little while again until Sunday, and then you're going to see me again because I go to the Father. Mm-hmm. So this is the ultimate reality that they're going to have sorrow, and of course it gets explicated. But I think he's taking this very seriously, and I think that their confusion about it, he also is pretty gentle. He does say, "Are you inquiring among yourselves?" So there's a little bit of a rebuke. Why didn't you just ask me directly, right? How do you think you fools are going to solve this problem, right? Blind can't lead the blind. So they're asking the wrong person. But he does then, explicate it in a very clear way. They're going to weep and lament while the world rejoices. But there's going to be this reversal, and all of this based upon sight, that they're going to see him again, and he's going to see them in verse 22. You have sorrow now, but I will see you again, and your heart will rejoice, and your joy no one will take from you. So he really does want to teach this reality so that when their joy comes back, they'll be able to understand the glory of the cross and the goodness of it.
Is there any significance to the change from 16 to 22 where he says, you'll no longer see me and then you will see me. And then in 22, you won't see me, but then I will see you. Is there a significance to that change in the subject from second person plural to first person singular?
I think it's a completion.
Okay.
So I think it's both. So the beatific vision is both.
Okay.
Right. That he sees us and that we see him, right, as he is. Right. And that we are now. So I don't think I wouldn't say it's a change, but it's a fullness.
Yeah.
Right? So the first promise is you're going to see me again. I'm going to die, but I'm going to rise and you're going to see me. But in you seeing me, you're only going to be able to see me because I see you. Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Because I go to the Father. The only reason you get to see me again is because I go to the Father. Otherwise, I'd just be dead. And, the atheists would be right and death would just be the end and there'd be nothing. Or worse, the pagans would be right and there'd be eternal torture. So, here's the truth. I'm going to the Father. So it's like, this is like, their sorrow their sorrow is inappropriate on Friday. They're sorry about the wrong things. Not exclusively the wrong things, but mostly the wrong things. And they misunderstand what's happening. And it's like, it's like you have a piece of this Easter candy, to give to this toddler and, he sees it and then you're trying to open the wrapper and he starts bawling because you're not giving it to him. Right. There's just this right. Toddlers are the best because the flesh is so much on the surface. They're not civilized at all. So they can't hide anything. Right.
Yeah.
So everything is right. Their impatience, because they don't have it that exact second. And their misunderstanding of what you're doing when you're opening it, thinking that you're somehow keeping it from them. That's sort of the kind of impatience and ridiculousness in a sense that the disciples are engaged in.
Okay. So
that's what he's trying to. They're not going to understand it until after the resurrection, of course. But this teaching will come back to them.
So, is there when he brings up the whole woman giving birth, does he have in mind kind of that ancient? I don't remember if it's Plato or that you can only understand the good times with the sorrow. That you have these two opposites going on.
That's interesting. That's interesting.
That you must have great difficulty to understand great joy. Or
no, I think we're gonna have to reject that.
Okay.
because that would make God the author of evil.
Mm-hmm.
That would mean that there is no good apart from evil,
Great.
or
Okay.
there is no. Yeah, and so I think I don't think that's a right. I mean, it is possible to have joy, right? Or at least it was possible to have joy apart from, right? I mean, in the garden they had joy and they had no sorrow.
Yeah.
So
So is this Jesus's way of saying that difficulty is a prelude to joy for his Christians?
yeah, I think so. I think there's a bunch of things going on with this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, first of all, the whole woman example is so magnificent because, and I love the language of her hour, right?
Yeah.
You know, in the mouth of Jesus at his hour, right? His hour is to lay down his life for the world. Her hour is to bring life into the world through her own sorrow and difficulty. She, right? That Eve is the mother of the living. You have this in Mark's, at the end of Mark's gospel. Why do you seek the living among the dead? Which means that Jesus is the son of Eve, right? And that he is the living God, right? So to give birth, for a woman to give birth, to bring a child into the world, I think is the most divine activity that human beings participate in.
Mm-hmm.
This is the essence of the living God, and women have been given this honor, right, and this particular privilege, and so this is her hour of suffering, but by which life comes. Mm-hmm. So it's not just an example, just a convenient example like mine of the candy wrapper, right? It's a much fuller. There's more going on there than just there's pain, but it will work out in the end. So that's part of it, but I think there's more to it there. Now I forgot what you were talking about.
This is kind of written into the fabric of creation, a
After
constant prophecy of the death and resurrection of Jesus and what it brings.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
She'll be saved by childbirth, right? There is very much a sense in which every conception is messianic.
Mm-hmm. Which is why
this is a miracle.
Why abortion is so popular among pagans, because they want to stamp out this prophecy. Or currently, the anti-marriage crowd also, they want to stamp out the living prophecy of Christ and his church.
Wow. Yeah. I never thought of that, but I think that's right. I think
so there are, I mean, we always knew there were demonic forces behind it, but particularly anti-gospel demonic forces trying to snuff out the things written into the fabric of creation that proclaim what God has and is doing among his world, his creation.
Right. And right, the devil is after death. Jesus is the giver of life, which is, this is why he rises.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, he's not the author of death. He's not ushering in death. I mean, the appeasement of his Father's wrath, the atonement itself is, even though it's by death, I mean, it ushers in life and he transforms death, physical death for the Christian. I don't want to be absolutely dogmatic about this, but I think that in John's gospel at the Passion, right, that we should not, the physical death of Jesus is not part of the punishment or of course, in some sense, everything he does is part of the atonement on the ransom that he's paying. But when he says it's finished, right, part of everything's finished, but the punishment's finished. And then physical death is a relief. And he's released from his burden. He's released from, that's the end of the humiliation in a way, certainly the end of his sorrows, right? And he goes, and then that death, his peaceful death and release and being received in his Father's bosom transforms our physical deaths, which is, then completed in the resurrection.
Yeah.
So there is this, but that transformation of death is not a creation of death or a giving of death. It serves life and it ushers in life.
Okay.
So anyway, but life anyway in the woman is a big deal.
Yeah.
Right. And this is not just like I said, this isn't like my stupid candy illustration. This is actually a much more profound, as you said, written into the fabric of creation.
Yeah.
So One other thing on that, since you brought up the abortion thing, I think, when we talk about male and female virtues, it's really difficult to distinguish because, courage, for example, physical courage and moral courage, but both of these things are required of women and can be exemplified in women, right? And the same thing so it's hard to really talk about virtues as being distinctly masculine or feminine, or even more essential to one or the other. But I think it does show up in a way in vices, that there are vices or failures of virtue that are more offensive in one or the other. That it is more offensive for a man to act in a cowardly way than it is for a woman. And it is more offensive for a mother to abandon her children than it is for a father. Not that it's good in any way, right? It's still a vice. If a woman is a coward, that's a vice. Christian women are called to be courageous. And in the same way, of course, obviously, Christian fathers are called upon to nurture and care for their children. But there is something that I think in the vice we see something of the distinction between male and female, right? We have a problem in our current reality of seeing a difference between men and women outside of the pulpit, right? That's the only kind of place we can see a difference. That they're not allowed to be pastors, but anything else goes. They can carry guns, they can be conscripted, right? The Missouri Synod is all about the Romans 13 allows the government to conscript women to die for our sons. I think the Missouri Synod's failed completely because that's wrong. And this is one of these places I think where we see it, right? That the woman's hour is in the giving of birth and then continues then by the raising and the caring of children. And therefore that being the most essential activity of humanity in a sense, to be fruitful and to multiply, that's what should be protected as the most that's why she doesn't go fight in wars.
Yeah.
Right. Ideally. I mean, of course, again, I understand. I'm familiar with the story of Jael and Deborah, and I know there's times when, because of the wickedness of this world, when women do have to engage in these things. But those are, that doesn't that's the exception that shows the rule, not the, I guess it's fine,
Yeah. Well,
Mary Magdalene is the apostle to the apostles. That's not that doesn't mean women's ordination is okay.
Yeah, exactly. I'm thinking about this whole virtue thing. Virtue comes in Latin from the root vir, which means man. The ancients make a distinction between manly virtue and feminine virtue, or did they make that distinction in the household codes that came about? And so do we see this taking place within the New Testament and the Old Testament? I'd say particularly the New Testament, when Paul gives household codes in his epistles like Ephesians, Colossians, Titus, 1st and 2nd Timothy.
Well, I think so. The problem is Aristotle does not have an appropriate or godly view of women. He doesn't. So you do have this problem in the Romans. They don't actually recognize. They don't seem to quite recognize women as full human beings or children, and so I don't know that we can go to them for this.
Yeah.
In terms of Paul's codes, they really don't go to Paul. Go to Genesis 3. There all of the curse. I know that's the opposite again, but that's, except for the pain in childbirth, those are universally applicable, right? Thorns come up also for Eve, and Adam also has the desire for those who exercise authority over him. And all of that kind of suffers really in some sense equally. I don't think that Paul's household admonitions have really, they're not about distinctions amongst virtues. They're about the hierarchy and the duties that we carry out within them according to our vocation. So our relationships to other people.
But virtue sets forth duty, does it not?
Does virtue set forth duty? isn't it the other way that duty requires virtue? I don't know. I'm not a philosopher, obviously.
I'm not either.
We're probably going to get rebuked by some Hillsdale grad.
Yeah.
But well, anyway, in the
you should
Bible,
email Petersen about it, not me.
in the Bible, I feel like I could talk about the Bible, maybe not Aristotle, but the Bible, right? The table of duties is, or the tables of duties, in the various places that they come about.
Mm-hmm.
They really have to do with our vocation within the estates. And how we relate to one another and how we carry this out. And some of that language is virtue language, like love and so forth. But I think it really, it's always subsumed in this kind of order. Whereas, that's different because it has a higher view of humanity than any of the ancients.
Yeah. I guess I've always seen virtue as... if one is virtuous, one is properly ordered. He's wise.
Yeah. Well. Anyway, there's no virtue that is distinct, male or female.
Yeah.
I mean, all human beings are called to all of the things that are truly virtues, including the theological virtues, of course.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. So if you've got the 7 cardinal virtues,
right?
The 4 whatever and the 3 theological.
Anyway, what I really wanted to talk about today was these types of sorrow. So speaking of philosophy, I spent a couple hours reading an Aristotle this morning, Aquinas this morning. Practically the same thing, as we all know. Yeah. But so I got interested recently and I'm going to write the next Gottesdienst journal article about envy within the ministerium. And particularly, I got driven to this by this passage in Philippians where Paul says he doesn't care why they're preaching the gospel as long as they're doing it. Yeah. And
some preach it from envy and others from that
strife.
That passage.
Yeah. So, what in the world is he talking about there? I think what he's not talking about, I don't think he's talking about heretics. He wouldn't be happy. That wouldn't be actually preaching the gospel. But I think what he is doing in the context there's a lot about this humility. And I think Paul is having to sort of let go and suffer some insults and some slights from the brothers, because of their own weaknesses and ambitions and the like. And he kind of comes to recognize, well, maybe I'm being a little oversensitive and I'm going to let this go in humility because the gospel is being preached. That's sort of the thesis. So anyway, sort of looking at this and thinking about this, how can Paul endorse this? And so I was reading about envy in Thomas, and then that led me to he categorizes envy as a kind of sorrow. And so then I went, so I was working on this earlier in the week, and then today's text, right? We've got this language about sorrow and the comparison between sorrows and joy. And so, it's beautiful Thomas is brilliant.
Yes.
So the way that he breaks this stuff down, what is really a joy, what is, happiness in humanity. And the first thing he does is he says, the real joy, true joy, is to be seen by God and to see him, right? The beatific vision. That's what it really is, to know God as good and then to be conjoined to him, to recognize it. So to have it and to recognize him for what he is and to see him clearly. And there's a certain sense in which on this side of glory, we're never going to be fully and perfectly full of joy until we get to that because we're always longing for it. Mm-hmm. So he goes through that whole thing. Well, we've got this seeing language right here, right? That you will see me again and I will see you. And then he goes through what is joy not, and it's sort of obvious in a way, but that joy is not just pleasure, because joy is actually in the joyful. So it is a characteristic of the one who has joy. It's not an external thing. Pleasures have always, on this side of glory, sad ends, right? So if your pleasure is in your body, well, that's failing and it won't endure. If your pleasure is in food, whatever, music, you name it. And then he says, okay, and he goes, it takes him a long time, but he goes through very painstakingly. It's not wealth, it's not honors, it's not fame or glory, it's not power, it's not bodily good. So what is it? It's the beatific vision. Well then, so great. So that's what joy is, and that's where we're headed, and that corresponds very nicely with our text. Then you have him, he goes through, again, painstakingly, pages and pages of what is sorrow, what causes sorrow. And he does operate with this idea that an evil is a lack. Mm-hmm. So evil isn't something in itself, but it's when something's missing. So poverty is a lack of wealth, right? Hunger is a lack of nourishment, whatever. So what is it then to have sorrow? It's to have a lack and to know it. So right? So you have to, if you don't know it, if you don't have the ability to sense it, then it doesn't create sorrow. So it could be evil, but not a sorrow, right? Sorrow requires some kind of intellectual or physical awareness. Mm-hmm. What is proper sorrow? Proper sorrow is to be sorrowful for your own evil. And this is the beginning or the essence in some sense of repentance. So this is the proper sorrow, right? Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Mm-hmm. And on. He quotes all those passages, which are easy to find. Then there's also another proper sorrow, and that is pity, which is to be sorrowful for evil that is suffered by someone else, right? Mm-hmm. So repentance and pity are appropriate and have their place. But mostly, of course, we experience sorrow not so purely, and the sort of two forms of sorrow that are inappropriate are envy and anxiety. Mm. So envy is sorrow over another person's good, which is seen to be a lack on our own part, right? Mm-hmm. So if your people are praising you, and then I'm envious of that, I think they should be praising me instead. Yeah. So I'm missing something that's been given to you. That's how I perceive it, and I cause then in my own imagination and in my own mind, I create this pain in myself, and this produces sorrow. And he calls this a capital sin, and he goes to a great length. It's interesting to me how all these other sins spring from envy. It's one of the sort of chief problems. And then anxiety.
Well, it's one of the 7 deadly sins.
Yeah, right. So there you go. And then anxiety this is great, sorrow for the future. Isn't that interesting? So to be sorrowful about something that hasn't even happened, and of course may not happen. And then this sorrow, inappropriate, of course, because we should trust in God and believe that he's good and expect good from him. And then, and this is really, I thought, interesting, this particular form of sorrow can lead to lethargy or sloth or acedia, or, right, it can actually affect the physical body that you don't actually get off the couch, right? Mm-hmm. That you can't even move or even speak. Yeah. So it can, we would call this, in modern terms, we would call this clinical depression. Yeah. And he sees this as a sin in and of itself that was begotten by earlier sins that, anyway, I think, to think about some of that, what is sorrow? And then to think about the apostles, right, on Good Friday, they have sorrow. They're not really sorry about the right things on Good Friday. They're sorry that, well, first of all, there's a kind of ignorance of the means by which God is saving them. So they don't recognize the glory of Jesus and his self-giving and the way that he's loving the world and working out their redemption. And they don't also believe his word and expect they'll see him again. They think he's dying and he's going to be dead forever. Mm-hmm. So you've got all those problems, ignorance, impatience, selfishness. But then also, from that then comes this misappropriate sorrow that they're not feeling sorrow over their sins, right? They're feeling sorrow over a loss of a friend or a meal ticket or threat anxiety because, right, like on Sunday, on Sunday night, right, they're going to lock the door for fear of the Jews. That's by Thomas's definition, that's anxiety, fear for the future. Yeah. Or sorrow for the future.
Do the apostles have envy of the chief priests and scribes and Romans or.
Yeah, we certainly know they have envy of one another. I mean, you have you have John and James, and even John's little jabs at Peter,
how
about
fast
how he's
he can
the
run.
first one, or the first one to recognize Jesus, and that, that kind of stuff. Do they have? I mean, it seems likely. I don't know that we have any evidence of them being envious. I mean, textually, I think it's certainly reasonable to expect that they were envious of the wicked, which is foolishness. But I don't know that we have any.
So does Thomas
Maybe Peter at the court, wanting to be friended by the.
Yeah, does Thomas relate at all the proper sorrow of pity when you are sorrowful over the evil that someone else suffers, how that turns into anxiety? Does he talk about that at all?
No, he would. Well, I mean, maybe somewhere, but not in this section. He's got basically only one sentence on pity. He doesn't really explore it at all. I wish he would have, because he's very interested in repentance and he's very interested in these other things, but I didn't see, or I missed it.
It's probably a mixed bag, right? The apostles have some pity, and anxiety and envy.
Yeah.
But do they recognize any of the proper sorrow for their own evil?
Yeah. So I don't think they really quite do on Saturday, but again, I think with hindsight.
Yeah.
Right. So I think, this statement of, let me find the verse number here, verse 20. So, amen, I say to you that you will weep and lament, but the world will rejoice, and you will be sorrowful, but your sorrow will be turned into joy. So I wonder if we should take that not just simply as a chronological description of Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, but of actually this is what the life of repentance and absolution is. That he's not just talking about, look, in a little while you won't see me, I'm going to die, and then a little while I'm going to rise from the dead and you're going to see me. So I'm just telling you what's going to happen. That's all there is to it. No, of course not. Right? There's this is, like you said, or like this, the written to the fabric of creation, right? That the restoration of creation. And so this sentence too, right, in verse 20, is they're going to weep and lament over their sins when they recognize the reality of this, and the world will rejoice over their sins, or rejoice over their sadness, or the fact that they're guilty. Who cares? Whatever. The world doesn't know what it's doing, right? And you'll be sorrowful. You'll be sorrowful for the right things, but your repentance will turn into joy. Right? Yeah. The time is coming, and those things don't exist in isolation of one another at this point. But there does come the time, right, when finally, in verse 22, you now have sorrow, right? On Thursday night, they have sorrow. Friday, they have sorrow. Saturday, even Sunday and Monday, even after, they've received the peace in the upper room and they've eaten with Jesus and their eyes have been opened, they still have sorrow. But Jesus sees them and their hearts are rejoicing, and that joy no one will take from them, because it will ultimately be completed and they will see him as he means to be seen. And right.
Yeah. Okay. So how does this apply to us with these verses? So do we have to change the little while to mean after his ascension to his return? Or
yeah, I think we do. Yeah.
Okay.
That we're living in the little while between Pentecost and the last day. And all of our lives are a little while, right? With God, 1,000 years is a day. So, what does that make 100 years? 1/100th of a day. I don't know how many minutes that is, but I mean, it's not a significant amount of time, even though, of course, it feels like it at the moment. One of my favorite things to say is, right, that our lives are short and eternity is long.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what we definitely need to apply that.
Where else does the scriptures talk about a little, like a micron?
The mustard seed uses that word, doesn't it? I don't know. It'd be interesting. That would be a good, yeah. Probably are other places. Little Faith, I think that's also Micron.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure it is.
Is
Little Faith, little mustard seed.
The small, when Jesus says not even a jot or a tittle?
Ooh, I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, I'm just doing this from memory.
I know one is a Yoda, but I can't remember. It's,
could be
the smallest letter will pass away.
Oh, does it? Yeah.
Okay. That just popped in my head. So if you've got a little while, the opposite is not great but long.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, maybe. It could be both. Long, right? Everlasting, without end. I mean, forever and ever, right? Ion. We don't have any of that eternal language here, but certainly there are other places. I mean, even this language of hour, right? Which I do think, ties the childbirth to the cross, but also, an hour is a temporary. It's a very defined and relative in terms of a person's life, short.
Yeah.
Right?
And passing.
Passing. Right. Exactly. It's limited. Mm-hmm. Our sorrows are limited. They are not without end, but the joy is without end. We have a foretaste of it now. Jesus lives and our sins are forgiven. And we do know something of this beatific vision. We do know the presence of God in word and sacrament and his absolution and his word, right? I mean, at the same time, we still have these sorrows. So, but one will end and the other won't. Mm-hmm. We're not going to repent in heaven.
Right.
That'll be weird to not have any sorrows over your sin, right? We'll have an awareness.
Will there be any sorrow at all? Will there be sorrow over someone else? Will there be pity?
I don't think so. I don't think we're going to. I don't see how we could have pity for those in hell. That's of course what a lot of our people are worried about because of their loved ones. And they're like, I just can't be happy if so-and-so is not in heaven. Mm-hmm. And, I think that's just a foolish statement that just demonstrates that we don't know in what happiness really is. Mm-hmm. And we don't really trust in God's goodness and mercy to actually deliver. And, we kind of try to, the sort of professionals among us try to get around this with this kind of, whatever you need will be there. I mean, that's not false, but I don't know. I find that kind of condescending.
Yeah. Not
that I've never said it, but, it's amazing. It's amazing how hard the death of people's pets is on them. So I have dealt over the years with so many, they're embarrassed about it. They're pious people, but they just can't believe this dog dies, and they just can't believe how crushed they are. And so some of them will come and see me and they're like, I'm ashamed of myself. I know this seems like this isn't the appropriate response, but I just feel awful. Now, the good news is, as bad as they might feel, it is very fleeting. I mean, it is not like the death. It is not at all in the end like the death of a human. Mm-hmm. And pets are very easily replaced. I mean, they get another pet and they're really, maybe they don't like this new pet as much, but the sadness leaves, right? Yeah. It really does, or almost leaves. So, but anyway, that's one of these things that they're like, then they want to know, is this dog going to be in heaven? These are adults, mm-hmm. And I don't tell them if they need the dog to be in heaven to be happy, he will be there.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just a jerk, but I just think that's a kind of deceptive answer. Mm-hmm. It's not respectful.
Yeah.
Because so the real answer, of course, is look. We fully expect there will be dogs in heaven because we expect a new creation, right? A new heavens and a new earth. Mm-hmm. And in fairness, we don't know exactly what that means. And I can't say dogmatically that your exact dog with his exact personality won't be in heaven, but dogs don't have souls. And so I think we don't really expect your dog to be in heaven, mm-hmm. but we do expect you to, be fully satisfied and happy and content in heaven and to be filled with joy. And, right now you're worried about your dog. You should really be worried about your children, but they also, right. You will be at this place of when you are there perfectly in communion with God and seeing this, you're going to be satisfied, and I don't think you're going to have pity. So there you go. That was a long answer. I don't think any pity in heaven.
Yeah. Okay. So do you think so the problem is then that we kind of like what St. Paul talks about in Romans 1 and 2 is that we're thankful for the created things, not for the creator. And so, so what happens is we lose these things and we have sorrow over them, and we mistake the fix as having that created thing back instead of having the creator of the thing in full reality.
That's right. Right. So the problem is we're mistaking pleasure for joy.
Yeah.
So
okay.
right. Joy is in yourself. Pleasure is outside of you in a sense. So, right. The dog brings pleasure. My wife brings pleasure. I mean, all these things external to me can bring pleasure that I think I could never live without, or I don't want to. And of course I don't want to live without them. But at the same time, right. I think that's exactly right.
Okay.
It's
so what do you preach on here? Do you preach on how we live in this little while and don't have anxiety? Or are you going to try to talk about what the sorrows are and what the real joy is?
I think I'm excited about this sorrow stuff. I think it's interesting, and I think it's helpful to kind of analyze it and to think about it a little more deeply, because Aquinas again makes a distinction between sorrow and pain. That's also, I think, useful. So just this whole thing to sort of think about what really are we dealing with, and what is the difference between sorrow and joy, and how do we sort of recognize what a sorrow is, and again, what's the antidote to it, or what's Jesus promising us here? So I think I'm.
Is this in his Summa?
That. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. I guess I should have said that. Yeah. The only thing I know from him is his Summa. Really, I mean, a few sermons, but. It was in volume 2, part 2. It's a hard thing. How does that go? So part of it's in the first part of the second part, and the other part's in the second part of the second part, which this is volume 2 in my copy. And where's the other one? Around here somewhere, still on my desk. Here it is. And volume 3.
Okay.
So, and I mean, they have a nice index, you can, or table of contents actually. So if you read the first part on happiness, I'm translating that as joy. And then the cause of it's all there.
Okay.
So anyway, I doubt too many people will go and read it, but it'd be good. You should.
Yeah.
It'll only take you. There you go.
Okay.
So I'm kind of, so even though you were mocking me for my dislike of this Sunday, which is true, I do have trouble. Well, I don't mind the first one. It's the series of them that gets a little tough. But I think maybe this year I feel like I'm coming into it with a little more energy because of this.
So do you think that with this kind of focus on this particular first Sunday, will that help to put into context the rest of them? I mean,
I haven't got that far. I'm only talk to me
you
next
have
week.
Preached on it for the past 25 years?
I know more than, but yeah, but we'll see. Well, I was going to say another thing that I forgot to say was because this is Jubilate Sunday, which is make a joyful noise. So that sort of contrast too. I can't remember how it goes. The John 16, 15, and 16. I can't remember what Sunday comes after Jubilate. Rogate? It is, I think.
Yes. Rogate.
So that's ask, so anything you ask, that's before this. I mean, contextually, I think that's the passages before this. And then after that, yeah.
And then after it jumps to the stuff after this. So is there a sense in which, so this is the central thing, we actually have joy.
Oh, yeah.
And so I
think you're right.
So we have so we don't have sorrow. Although it seems like we do, we actually have joy. And so we can be confident and bold to ask. And then I can't remember the last thing.
I can't either. But I think you're right. I like that.
That's the one where the Holy Spirit is coming to convict the world of sin.
Right. Yeah. So the reason that this is out of order from the chronology of the discourse is because this is the defining thing from which the other things flow.
Okay.
I like it. We'll have to see if it shakes out. But
Yeah.
I think you're probably onto something. I probably said last year. I think that this section in John is parallel or plays the same role in John that the Sermon on the Mount plays in Matthew.
Oh, okay.
So I think this is a huge. That's why it's difficult. And I mean, the Sermon on the Mount's difficult, I think, as well.
Yeah.
And I think that the church, recognizes its centrality to John's gospel, and that's why it gets so much emphasis. I'm not claiming that means that I understand it, or I think it's. But that's,
so, are there parallels then that you would draw between this discourse?
I don't know if that's exactly parallels in the themes or some, obviously. I mean, that reversal of fortunes.
Yeah.
This here seems to match the Beatitudes. So I mean, we can find some parallels, but I don't know if there's if we need to draw a parallel in themes. I meant more in functionality.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
The central sermon in Matthew, right? The main teaching of Jesus in Matthew is the Sermon on the Mount. It has this prominent position, and I think this plays a similar role. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's why it gets so much attention in the lectionary. It's recognized as being important, right? Mm-hmm. Central.
Yes.
I mean, all of the Bible is, but we don't get it all in the lectionary, so decisions are made. Mm-hmm. And until of course we get somebody way smarter, who can make up his own ideas about how this should be done.
Yeah, maybe put it in a 3-year series, so you can get more Bible.
Instead of trying to figure out what your father meant, reject everything he did and make up your own system.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
No wise man.
Yeah, sounds like. That's right.
How about try to figure this out? That's my suggestion, and suffer it with me. Maybe by the end of my ministry, which of course that's a ridiculous phrase. The end of my ministry could be any minute.
Yeah.
But if the Lord keeps me here, maybe in another 30 years I'll figure this out.
Yeah. That would be something. Preaching for 60 years.
I could do it. It's possible.
Yeah.
I could live that long. I'd only have to live to 86 to do that. So there you go.
Yeah.
People have done this. This isn't that unusual.
No, I know. It's just when you think about your entire lifetime.
Yeah.
And how long you end up preaching, and that's amazing. And a lot of it's going to be forgotten by the whole world.
Of course.
But what I find always, maybe this reveals something about me, I don't know, but I always love to hear the stories that my people who grew up in the congregation tell about past pastors, good, bad, all this stuff. They remember them.
Yeah.
For their foibles, for the great things that they did, for all of those things. That left a mark, and that's pretty cool.
But they don't remember the sermons.
They don't remember the sermons.
I've never thought of that before, but they don't. They remember that. The other thing that I always think is funny, the most defining thing is always what pastoral act would you say? It's funerals.
Yeah.
They always say the first thing they say almost always is, he buried my mother. Mm-hmm. Not he married us, he baptized my kids. Yeah. That might come up, but almost always, he buried my mother. Mm-hmm. I remember when they don't know what he said at any of those occasions. Mm-hmm. They might say he was a great preacher, but if you ask them to say something he said, they can't do it.
That's funny.
That's pretty humbling, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. But they do remember things that you've said a lot. So they'll sometimes say, I remember, in catechism, pastor always pounding this. So they do remember some of that stuff.
They do. Well, I think they remember. You don't remember everything your dad said, but you have the sense of what he said. You believe what he said, and it's just you've incorporated it. I think so. Preaching is such a mystical activity. I think that's one of our problems. We don't actually revere it enough. And it is ephemeral, right? It is passing. It's transitory. It doesn't endure. It's for the moment. mostly.
Mhm.
But it's an institution. Christ institutes this, right? Teaching them all that I have taught, teaching them to observe all that I have taught you. This is. It really is an amazing thing that we stand up week after week after week and talk for 15 to 20 minutes, and they just sit there and listen.
Yeah.
I mean, it just doesn't happen anywhere else in the world.
Do you think that the advent of like recording devices and the internet has changed the way that pastors go about thinking about preaching? Do you think
That's a
that
good question.
instead of trying to preach to the people right in front of them, they're trying to preach for kind of a lasting abstract audience?
Oh, well, I'm positive that we've been changed. The way our brains work have been changed by the media that we consume. So I'm sure we've been affected by this, but I don't know what the exact consequence or is it that you mean that like we're sort of aware that this is being recorded and somebody might be listening in Australia or something like that?
Yeah. And so we are preaching to a possible person who might hear it instead of the actual people and so we make it more abstract, less concrete, less to the people who actually are right there, to give them either admonitions or directions from the scriptures. We tend to make it more of a gospel reductionist. Maybe that's not the right word, but we try to make it more palatable for an abstract audience instead of really addressing what's on the mind of the people right then and there.
I don't know. I mean, I don't think I'm not aware of either in the writing or in the preaching of sermons. I'm not consciously aware.
I know, but you're from an earlier generation about this.
Oh, well, that could be. I was more thinking, and you might be right. And I mean, maybe I said I'm not consciously aware, but maybe it seems to me like just the whole thing, I wonder if just intercourse itself has just been cheapened. Because I would say it's not so much that we're trying to preach to somebody that's not there. It's just that words are so cheap and information is so cheap and memory is so denigrated because we can just look it up, that all of those sorts of, and our attention spans and, our love of images. And I don't know. I mean, it seems like if we were trying to preach to the abstract and to the person who's not really there, maybe we'd do a better job. I've quoted this a million times, this thing about Nagel going, Norman Nagel, the sainted professor from St. Louis that was held in such esteem by his students. He went to one of his former students' churches one Sunday, and the guy was terrified because he, just honored Nagel so much. And then afterwards he says this to Nagel, "Oh, I was so scared because you were here, ha, ha, ha." And Nagel says, "Well, God is here every Sunday. Aren't you afraid of him?" Just typical Nagel. We could see why he was so loved. So, I mean, there is I would think if we thought Nagel was listening, maybe we'd do better. We'd try harder. But maybe that would be a positive thing in some ways. I'm thinking it's just communication is just cheap. How many podcasts are there? Billions. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Yeah, I'm sure it's affected us. It's a great question. I don't know how we would discern. It'd be difficult from within the inside to tell. We almost need somebody to come back from the future 100 years from now and tell us what we did wrong.
Yeah.
How we were, But we should try to think about it. I will think about it. I don't know that I'll come up with anything, but it's it's an important idea, I think.
All right. Any final thoughts?
No final thoughts. Thank you.
All right. Very good.
That was fun.
We'll pick up next week with Easter 5 or 4, whichever you guys call it.
All right. Thanks,
Take
Jason.
care.